Welcome, everyone. If you want to put in the chat also where you're from tonight. Are you in a smoky part of the country, or you're not in a smoky part of the country? But put it in the chat where you're from so we know, because we get a lot of out of the country people. We get some Korea, we get some Bahamas, so Minnesota. There we go, California. California, we now know on the East Coast how you deal with these wildfires. Not fun.
Hawaii. I'd like to be in Hawaii right now.
Yes.
Definitely. I'd like to be in
can-
Hawaii anytime.
State, we got some, they're from everywhere. It's amazing. Well, I'll go ahead and I'll just get this started here. Good evening, I'm Lori Davin, and I'd like to welcome you to the NAFTA webinar series for 2023. We welcome you here tonight. Tonight's topic is nutrition for skin health. True beauty, beauty comes from within. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Laura Gaylord, and the webinar is being sponsored by Standard Process. Big thank you to Standard Process. And we also have Jody with us from Standard Process tonight. Welcome, Jody. Just some things to go over. Questions. If you have a true question for tonight's webinar, please put it in the Q&A. Don't put your question in the chat, because as you can see, the chat's a live feed. A question will get lost. We're going to hold questions till the end of the webinar, just so she can get through all of her slides. And, we're able to provide all of the information that they have to you tonight. Jody's going to talk about some swag that we're going to offer tonight also. So this is a 1-hour webinar. You will get a certificate. I will be emailing them to you, or if you're a member of NAFTA, they will be uploaded into your member profile probably next week. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it on to Jody, and she's going to do some talking, and she's going to introduce Dr. Gaylord. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lori, for the opportunity. Hello, everybody. We're so excited to have you here with us tonight. Dr. Gaylord has some incredible information that's prepared for you, just really focused on the importance of nutrition, and especially related to our skin cases, which I know from all of you that are in practice, you realize how many skin cases we're seeing. I'm a CVT and I work for Standard Process. Standard Process is a whole food-based supplement company that is based out of Wisconsin. We have products that are available for cats and for dogs and for horses. Our whole basis is we provide animals with nutrients that are coming from foods. A lot of those ingredients are going to be coming from our certified organic farm that's right down the road here from our manufacturing facility here in Wisconsin. We also have a huge quality control department, which is a really important part of our company, because we want to make sure that the supplements that you guys are recommending for your patients are going to be beneficial and efficacious, and something that you have confidence in recommending. So we do have some fun giveaways tonight. On the next slide, you will see that there is a swag pack that we are giving away to there's 50 of them that we're going to be giving away. And in order for you to be eligible for this gift, you have to make sure that you are on the webinar for the entire time. And then we will select 50 attendees from that list who make it through the end, because lots of great information and Q&A at the end. So we will select 50 people from that list, and then we will reach out to you via email to get a mailing address, just to make sure that if it's in the NAVTA database, we have the accurate one, or if it's not, then we'll make sure that we'll get that from you. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Laura Gaylord. Dr. Gaylord and I have worked on multiple different projects. She's an incredible speaker. She's a wealth of knowledge. And so I'm excited to be able to turn that over to you.
Thank you, Jody. She's so kind. She's always a great announcer. Yeah, so tonight I'm going to be talking about nutrition for skin health. I think we all kind of agree that nutrition is the foundation, and there's certainly a lot more interest in nutrition lately, and I'm so thrilled to see that. But true beauty comes from within, so we want to set our patients up with the best possible nutrition plan to make sure that we can optimize skin health in every possible way, and that's going to make all of our owners super happy too, when their dogs and their cats look beautiful, of course. So just a little bit more about myself. I am a board certified veterinary nutritionist, as Jody said. I was in general practice, however, for over 24 years. I decided after 14 years of working that I was glutton for punishment and wanted to go back to school again. So I did what's called an alternative track clinical nutrition residency part-time. So kept working during that period of time and basically spent 1 week a month at my veterinary school, alma mater, NC State University here in North Carolina, and worked towards getting my board certification over a period of about 5 years. And after that, I started my own company called Whole Pet Provisions, where I mostly do nutrition consulting for pet parents. So since COVID, we have the wonderful ability now to do more telemedicine practice. And so we talk to pet owners. I do a lot of homemade diet formulations, but we also do commercial diet recommendations. And we have healthy and sick pets that we work with. And in addition to that, I will do some pet food and pet supplement company consulting. And this is why I'm doing this for one of my favorite companies, Standard Process, here tonight. I also belong to a nonprofit called Can We, which is Companion Animal Nutrition and Wellness Institute, which primary focus is to fund research, independent research on nutrition topics for all kinds of situations. Okay, so we're going to next just kind of dive right in. We're going to talk about the skin. And we all know the skin is, what we see when we look at our patients. It's what we see when we look at ourselves. But we should remember that it is the largest organ in the body, and it is constantly exposed to different challenges that are coming not just from the outside, but also internally. So this is why nutrition is important. There is a high physiological requirement to maintain skin health. So the nutrients that we need to support best skin is very, very high. And any changes that happen in the body, systemic changes, immunologic changes, if there's changes in health status, they can really have marked effects on what's going on in the skin. So we need to remember that, if we have metabolic disease or kidney disease or liver disease, we could have impacts in the skin as well at the same time. And the stats are saying that dermatologic complaints make up about 25% of the clinical cases that come into the veterinary hospital. I actually think that's kind of low. I think you probably agree with me that there's all kinds of bad skin stuff going on. And in practice, I would even venture to say it could be as much as half of our cases have some type of skin issue. And there's many underlying causes that we would consider. Certainly nutrition is a big one. So if we have inadequate nutrition going in, we're not going to have the best hair coat or skin quality on that pet. But also hormonal imbalances, endocrine diseases. If there's external agents affecting the skin, that could be our bacterial or yeast infections, or even physical or chemical issues. Immunologic reactions, of course, everybody thinks they have chicken allergy, right? But allergies do affect the skin, of course. Cancers can affect the skin. Genetics can play a role in what type of skin or hair coat quality they have. So these are all things we're thinking about when we think about the skin and working up problems. And we work these cases up similar to how we would really any condition that comes in, any illness. We're going to look at their signalment. So what is it, a male, female? What's their age? What are those pet statistics? What is the history? How long has it been going on? What parts of the body is it affecting? What are the clinical signs? Are they itchy? Are they not itchy? We're just getting all that data, and then we're doing our physical examination. And of course, as part of that, we want to do a really good and thorough diet history, talk to those owners, ask what they're feeding. Hopefully they'll tell you the truth, right? And ask about treats and snacks and all those other things going on. And then from there, we might do our minimum database for the skin. That's going to look like taking cytologies. We might look at the pattern of distribution on that pet. We should be doing skin scrapings pretty often. And then, for some select cases, we might even be doing cultures and sensitivities, or even skin biopsies if we need to get better answers. The complete blood count, chemistry, urinalysis, thyroid testing often is a part of that workup, just getting an assessment really of that pet's general health. And so from there, we would generate a differential diagnosis list. So we're coming up with what are the most likely issues that could be going on. And then we're going to design some type of treatment plan. So your veterinarians are going to be thinking, how am I going to manage this skin condition? What types of medications are appropriate? But we also about therapies as what we call multimodal, which means there's usually just not one thing we're doing. We're actually putting together an entire plan of things. And that might be drugs, that could be antibiotics, that could be other drugs that come off the shelf for inflammation, our allergy medications. Diet is a component of that. So does the pet have the best possible diet that's going to support its skin health? And certainly, does it have a deficient diet or an inappropriate diet, or maybe, a poor diet? Those are things we need to be thinking about. And then in addition to that, there are supplements that can be used to support the skin. Numerous examples of things we might add to that. Some of that we're going to talk about tonight and go through options. But this is kind of what we consider multimodal therapies, similar to how we might do an arthritis case. We're thinking of multiple things we're putting together to help support the skin. So when we talk about skin health and diet, the first and foremost priority is to make sure we're considering whether that pet's diet is complete and balanced. And that means we're looking at the foods. Does it have one of these AAFCO nutritional adequacy claims on the bag? Is it appropriate for that pet's life stage? So there are only two life stages. There is growth and there is adult maintenance. And so we want to make sure that we are matching that up with the right age. Could there be nutritional imbalances? So this can happen. I think we tend to overlook nutritional imbalances quite a lot. So usually when pets are going through a very demanding life stage, so the growth phase or gestation or lactation, these are high energy demanding stages. Those are the most risky stages for nutritional deficiencies to happen. And so check that diet. We want to look and see what are they feeding. If it's a commercial food, hopefully it's the right life stage, complete and balanced. But you're going to have some clients on homemade food diets, homemade recipes. There it should be formulated and complete and balanced by a veterinary nutritionist, hopefully. And so they have a good plan. But are they giving additional foods or treats on top of that diet? So that can unbalance the diet if they're doing too much of that. Poor quality commercial foods exist. We all know those are out there. They might be giving a lot more supplements than they need to. So that's one thing I'll see with my patients. I don't like to see a lot of vitamin mineral supplements added on top of complete and balanced pet foods, because then we're actually worried about excess amounts. And actually in commercial foods, occasionally, sometimes there will be nutrient excesses, usually not on purpose, but this is what generates recalls sometimes that happen. So as nutritionists, we will talk about what we call key nutrients of concern. So once we go through our pet and we have a physical exam and we have sort of a list of problems, and then we generate that differential diagnosis list, we're, as nutritionists, our next step then is to think about, so what nutrients are most relevant for this case? And for skin, the macronutrients that are the big ones are proteins and fats. And we will say that our pets, our dogs and cats, actually don't have a protein requirement in their diet. They have an amino acid requirement. So we want to focus in then, proteins are made up of amino acids, and there are essential amino acids that they must take in every single day in their diet. This is actually true for fatty acids as well. There are some fatty acids that are considered essential. The body doesn't make them, so they must eat them in their diet. And when we don't have enough of those, we will get deficiency concerns. Hair keratinization. So if the skin doesn't form very well, the keratin doesn't form very well, we'll start to see breakdown of the skin. We could have hair loss or differences in color. We could have secondary bacterial and yeast infections that pop up. If they have wounds, they're not going to heal as well, and they can actually get ulcers on different areas of the body, the elbow being extremely common. For protein and amino acids, we know that proteins make up about 65 to 95% of the hair structure in dogs and cats. So it's the vast majority of that skin and hair is made of protein. That makes it really important. And about 30% of the daily protein intake is actually going into skin and coat renewal for some of these small breed dogs that have very long hair coats. So that's just an amazing amount. About a third of the protein they're eating every day is going into making skin and hair. That's a lot of investment. And speaking to some specific amino acids that are important or that relate directly to skin and hair coat, we know methionine and cysteine relate to that keratin that forms in the skin. Phenylalanine and tyrosine are 2 amino acids that are needed for maximum black hair coat color in dogs and cats. And then we know arginine and glutamine. These are 2 amino acids that are relevant for immune function, for best immune function. In fact, those ingredients you're going to see in some of those critical care diets, some of those liquid diets that we use for our most sickest patients. And fatty acids also are very important for skin and hair coat health. So we have some that we consider essential, and then we have some that are really important to have the best hair and skin coat quality. So on the omega-6 side, linoleic acid is an essential fatty acid that is very important for maintaining what we call the transepidermal water barrier. And its function is correlated with meeting that essential linoleic acid requirement. So I will see dogs on ultra low fat diets, sometimes are skirting the very bottom or could actually be deficient in linoleic acid. And we might see down the line over months, you know, they don't have the best skin, or they start to have skin infections or itchy skin or flaky skin. And we might start thinking about, well, do they have enough of that linoleic acid in their diet? The omega-3s can play a prominent role in regulating inflammation. And so supplementing omega-3s can be a strategy to try to reduce inflammation within the body. So speaking of essential fatty acid deficiencies, so this could be our omega-6s primarily, but if we don't have enough omega-3s present, we could see excess scaling, hair loss again, balding or alopecia, dry and dull hair coats. If it's severe, we could have redness or erythema on the skin surface. And then sometimes we can actually get that exudate between the toes interdigitally. We might see some moisture, some inflammation happening there. So those could all be signs of essential fatty acid deficiency states. I think about this when I get those unthrifty puppies coming from the shelter. They've been on maybe a poor diet. They have heavy worm burdens. They're not digesting and absorbing very well. These, you know, we see those flaky skin puppies coming in. Think about nutritional deficiency states and making sure we get a good diet. Essential fatty acids have also been really useful for treating dogs that may have allergies, both food allergy and what we call atopic dermatitis. So here's 3 studies here that we're looking at supplementing the omega-3s or the omega-6s for dogs that have allergy conditions. And we have found by doing that, we can actually reduce itchy skin or pruritus and reduce self-trauma, and we can improve hair coat health. And what's actually really powerful here is some dogs that were on cyclosporine in one of the studies, it was found that adding polyunsaturated fatty acids like omega-6s and 3s to their diet can actually spare some of the medication use. So we're able to reduce the dose of the stronger medications by adding supplements. What about carbohydrates? So we talked about proteins and we've talked about fats. Carbs always come up as the last remaining macronutrient here. And we know cats are carnivores. They have a protein and fat requirement. They don't require carbohydrates in their diet, but you might be surprised to know that dogs as well do not have a carbohydrate requirement in their diet. Although that doesn't mean they don't benefit from having some carbs in their diet. They definitely do. In certain life stages, it's best for them to have carbs. But carbs also bring in fibers, which is good for health. But carbohydrates do not cause yeast infections. You may have some pet owners come in and they swear that the carbs in the diet is causing dermatitis or an overgrowth of yeast. But this is a myth, and this is, you'll find this on the internet, but there are truly no studies that confirm that relationship. Malassezia, or yeast that grows on the skin, can overgrow with inflammation, and usually that's related to an underlying skin condition. But usually that inflammation is related to allergies, and it's not allergies to the carbohydrates. Typically, it's the animal protein sources in the diet. More often, it's probably environmental allergy, and it may not be food at all. So going on to different other different nutrients we think about with skin health, zinc is a big one that comes up. So we think about zinc content in the diet. There's definitely a required minimum for that. And when we don't have enough, we might see hair loss, ulcerations, dermatitis, foot pad disease, or infections of the nail bed, slow hair growth. We might see ulcerations around the mouth, or we might see plaque lesions or even secondary bacterial or yeast infections. And this relates mostly to dogs, pretty rare in cats. There have been a few reports of this, but most of the time we're thinking about it with our dogs. And there's two different types of concerns with zinc deficiency. The first would be our Arctic breeds. So you'll see dogs like our Siberian Huskies or our Malamutes actually have some genetic predisposition towards this, and they might benefit from zinc supplementation. We can diagnose that actually on skin biopsy. Puppies, however, that come in on poor diets. So these might be diets that have a lot of fiber or what's called phytates coming in. And they also could have excess mineral content that interferes with zinc absorption. So look at the diet, the quality of the diet. That could be important if it's a young, especially large breed, rapidly growing puppy. So these are some pictures that are come to you from the dermatology clinics of zinc deficiencies. And this is an Arctic breed. We've got up here a Siberian Husky that had several lesions on the face and the elbow and around the mouth. So that gives you a good look at what we would call a zinc responsive dermatosis. And dosing, I won't spend a lot of time on dosing, but again, look at the diet, make sure it's complete and balanced, appropriate for life stage. And if the diet is low end zinc, sometimes you won't know that just from what you see on the label. You have to do a little investigation and actually call the company. Or if it looks like a food that has a lot of cereal content, grains are first on the list. If it has soy or corn, which brings in those phytates, or a high mineral content, that might interfere again with zinc absorption. And so if we suspect that, it's great to do a biopsy and get a diagnosis, but sometimes we'll consider even supplementing zinc if we are highly suspicious that's going on. If it's a poor diet, we want to correct the diet, of course, and maybe we try to discontinue that zinc later if the clinical signs go away. Zinc supplements are safe, but you do have to be careful. You don't want to give too much. This is not the same thing of ingestion of pennies, which is what we think of with zinc toxicity. That is a very high dose, and that's of course associated with hemolytic anemias. But there's no established safe upper limit currently that guides us with zinc supplementation. But these are some dosings that I have used in dogs for this condition. Okay, moving on to vitamin A. Vitamin A is usually not deficient in diets, or we don't think about necessarily deficiency states, but we do see some dogs and cats that will respond to supplementation of vitamin A. So some of the skin diseases we see that we might be thinking about that are related to flaky skin or seborrhea, if we have some keratinization disorders or callus, chin acne, nasal digital hypokeratosis, different types of ear conditions, certain cancers or neoplasms, we might be thinking about extra vitamin A. There's something called Schnauzer-Komido syndrome, which I know every one of you have seen, but you probably didn't have a name for it, and I'll show you some pictures. And also sebaceous adenitis is super common. I have those two bolded because you've probably seen that one as well. And here's where I'll just point out that cats actually need a very special form of vitamin A. They need preformed retinoids. Dogs can make retinoids from what's called beta carotene in their diet, but cats cannot. And so that's a unique metabolic difference for cats. So this is dosing we have used mostly for dogs here. Again, check the food, make sure it's a good food for them that's complete and balanced. Sebaceous adenitis has a dosing. We also have some recommended doses for other vitamin A responsive skin conditions, a few here on the slide. And then while we're using vitamin A, we do have to be a little careful, and we monitor for a dry eye condition. We call that KCS, or keratoconjunctivitis sicca. And we also might monitor liver enzymes if they're staying on vitamin A supplementation for a long time. So a little more careful with vitamin A than we would be with zinc or some other vitamins. So here are the pictures I promised you. So if you think about dogs that come in and they have this sort of dry, flaky skin on the left, that could be vitamin A responsive dermatosis. On the right, I have a picture of Schnauzer-Komido syndrome. And so that's where it looks like you see those tiny little black bumps that pop up on the skin. And this is a breed related problem. So that's something to think about if you see those dogs coming in. Sometimes we might try a little vitamin A on top of their diet. Vitamin E is another one that comes up that skin and hair coat can benefit from. Both dogs and cats, we might try extra vitamin E with these skin diseases: discoid lupus, systemic lupus, pemphigus. There's something called sterile paniculitis, acanthosis nigricans, dermatomyositis, ear margin vasculitis, and a very weird disease we call steatitis in cats, which is basically inflammation that occurs in the fats associated with some high fish-based diets, typically pretty rare, but it does come up occasionally. And here's some pictures of some of those conditions, just two of them on the slide here. Discoid lupus on the left, you see these ulcerations and crusty lesions, usually at the margin of a mucous membrane and skin. So this is the nose. And then pemphigus on the right, we've probably all seen really nasty foot pads like that dry and flakiness that can sometimes happen. That doesn't mean they all have pemphigus, but sometimes if that is severe, if there's inflammation, a biopsy is what we're going to do to confirm that. So dosing, again, just the same reminder I always give: check the diet, make sure it's complete and balanced. And then we're going to look at different amounts of dosing for different skin conditions. The one I'll highlight here is atopic dermatitis. So lots of our patients have atopic dermatitis, and it sometimes is a thing that we might trial, giving a little extra vitamin E. Vitamin E is a really safe supplement. So adding a bit more sometimes can reduce clinical signs. That was shown in a study here in 2014. We also think about it, using it with immune-mediated skin diseases. As I mentioned, Demodex is actually on that list as well, dermatomyositis, and then the steatitis or pansteatitis in cats. We do have a guideline for dosing for that. So here I'll point out to you that per AFCO, so AFCO is our Association of American Feed Control Officials, we do have guidelines for pet foods for minimum recommendations, but actually the amount of vitamin E should correlate to how much fats are coming in the diet. So polyunsaturated fatty acids, this would be both our omega-6s and our omega-3s. If we combine those together, the amount of vitamin E should correlate with that. And if it's above a certain amount, I've given you the ratio on the slide, we'll actually put more vitamin E in relationship to that. And so sometimes we think about that too, if we're putting pets on fish oil. So fish oil is an omega-3, it is a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And so if we're adding more fish oil to the diet, sometimes we'll add vitamin E. Many of the fish oil supplements have vitamin E in them. If you look at the back label, you'll see there's vitamin E there, and that the purpose of that actually is more to prevent oxidation or that supplement going rancid. It's not really there for the pet's benefit, it's more for the supplement's benefit. So we still might dose vitamin E if we feel like we have a skin condition at the same time that might benefit. So copper is another one. Most of the talk about copper is not a deficiency state lately. So I would say this is quite rare, but copper is actually important for skin health. And if we don't have enough in the diet, we're going to see a loss of normal hair color. We might see a dull or rough coat, loss of reduced density of hair or alopecia. And so again, I think pets coming in on really poor nutritional status, not fed well, I might have copper on the differential list, but it's going to be lower on that list. And definitely if they're on a good diet, I would say this is pretty rare. In fact, too much copper has been really the concern most of the time lately. But again, you correct the diet and hope that, we've got that taken care of. So the question then is, do we need supplements? If we have a good diet, if we have a complete and balanced diet, do we actually need to add supplements to that pet's nutrition plan? Our goal is always we want to meet minimum recommendations, but there's a difference between meeting those minimums and providing optimal nutrition. So we do know that dogs and cats both, it can vary in their digestive and absorptive capacity, and they're all different. So I think nutritional deficiencies could be underdiagnosed. We could miss them because we're not very good at diagnosing them. So it needs to be on our minds that sometimes there are some conditions where we might consider supplements because we want to boost their intakes. And definitely if we can get some therapeutic benefits, if we're able to use supplements to reduce the amount of other medications that they're taking, then I see that as a huge positive. If we're able to reduce how much Apoquel they take by adding fish oil or hemp oil or another product, definitely that's really great that we can reduce the need for prescription medications by using supplements. So speaking to our polyunsaturated fatty acids, as we already mentioned tonight, we have our omega-6s and we have our omega-3s. 6s provide that linoleic acid and that helps support the skin barrier. Omega-3s are our anti-inflammatory, EPA and DHA primarily. There's another one called GLA as well. And these can reduce the amount of inflammatory molecules in the body and also modify the immune system. There's some talk about ratios, and there's a lot of debate right now about what's the optimal ratio of omega-6s and omega-3s in diet. But generally, we want more 3s and less 6s. And that's what we work towards. And adding an omega-3 supplement often helps us achieve that. They come in both oral forms for supplementation, but also now we have some dermatology products that have it as a topical therapy. And so that can be added to our multimodal treatment plan. Other vitamins and minerals you're going to see in supplements, vitamin A and vitamin E, as I already talked about. Sometimes there's also vitamin D that's there. Zinc, as we've already talked about as well, might be added to some of the supplements to boost zinc intakes, and some other micro minerals that are sometimes there: copper, iodine, manganese, selenium. All these might be included in supplements to support the skin. Now we also are looking at botanical extracts. So this is thinking more along herbal medicine guidelines and thinking, going back to traditional use. For thousands of years, all types of people have used herbals, therapies in different ways. But it is true that plant-derived compounds coming from our leaves, flowers, and roots and other plant parts can provide medicines. And they can have some uses here, all of them listed on the slide. They can modulate inflammation. They can support the epidermal skin barrier. They can have effects on bacteria, many of them living on the skin that are involved in skin diseases. They do interact with the immune system, and we might see anti-inflammatory benefits coming from them. So if we're able to use herbals or botanical extracts coming from supplements, either oral or topical, again, this might help us reduce the need for prescription medications. Here's some examples of that: marigold, St. John's wort, chamomile, or sage. These might be things you'll see in different supplements. Again, they have antibacterial, even antifungal, and broad spectrum effects. And there's descriptions of using them for skin infections, for pyoderma, otitis externa, infected wounds, or even fungal infections. Most of the time, these are topical therapies, but they also might come in oral products, and you'll see them there. There's another supplement called a bioactive lipid, and what that means is it's just a fat that is active in cell signaling, cell function, and regulation. So it's a lipid that we take in that might modify what's happening with our cell functions, and hopefully in a positive way, which is what we're going for, reducing inflammation and supporting the skin. One that's come out that is available as a supplement contains PEA, or palmitoyl ethanolamide. And what it is a naturally occurring endocannabinoid-like mediator, and it has the ability to downregulate mast cells. Mast cells are the cell that releases histamine. Histamine, of course, creates inflammation, and it's involved in allergic responses. So if we have a supplement like this, it can reduce the clinical signs that occur with some of our skin disorders. So it can come as an oral product or as a topical, and it's been looked at. There have been some studies on this, using it for hypersensitivities to dust mites or atopic dermatitis again. And the topical gel has been useful for reducing itchy skin and improving skin lesions. Next, we'll talk about the endocannabinoid system a little bit. And so the endocannabinoid system is, as you may be familiar with this, we think about it with our CBD products and our hemp oil products. But there have been studies looking at this system and atopic dermatitis in dogs. We have these endocannabinoid receptors located throughout the skin in healthy dogs and dogs that have skin inflammation or atopic dermatitis. In fact, dogs that have atopic dermatitis have almost a thickened or hyperplastic epidermis, and they have more receptors present in their skin. They are upregulated when there is inflammation. So if we used some of these agonists to these endocannabinoid receptors, we call them CB1 and CB2. What has been found is that we can actually reduce mast cell responses, and that mast cell response, that histamine release, is involved in that hypersensitivity reaction. Ultimately, that's what's causing our inflammation and our itchy skin. So if we treat them with endocannabinoids or drugs or supplements that target that endocannabinoid system, this might actually be a useful strategy that can really help some dogs that have inflammation in the skin. So where do we find these supplements naturally? We'll call those these endocannabinoids coming from plants, phytocannabinoids. These are plant-derived compounds that interact with that endocannabinoid system. And these have been shown in studies to downregulate gene expression involved with inflammation, and also create less inflammation through markers, less inflammatory skin markers in cell culture studies. So in atopic dermatitis, again, we think about that a lot because it's so common in our patients. We have used hemp oil, we have used CBD products. These are useful supplements that can help control itching and reduce itching in dogs. And again, it can reduce the dose of current medications that they're on. So it can be an adjunct therapy. It can be part of that multimodal therapy if it's appropriate for that particular pet. Okay, so next, we're going to talk about what's new and exciting in veterinary medicine and human medicine as well, and how the microbiome relates to skin. So the microbiome, you probably have heard this term tossed around, and it's just talking about usually the gut and what's living inside the gut, all those bacteria and other organisms that are living there. But it turns out we have a microbiome on every body surface, and that includes the skin. In fact, there's a microbiome within us and upon us. And we can think of this, our bodies as actually having four surfaces. We have the gut, even though it's inside us, it's still a surface, it's connected to the outside. And then we have the skin, the obvious surface that we live with. But then we have the respiratory tract, that's also a surface within us. And we have the urogenital tract. These are all portals to the outside. And so there is a microbiome living in all these places. And you can think of it like an ecosystem. We have an ecosystem living within us and upon us. And what's living there? Who is living there? This is what we call the microbiota. And it's composed of bacteria. That's maybe what we understand the most right now, even though there is so much more that we need to learn. But we also have viruses there. We have fungi there, or fungi, whichever way you like to say that. And then we have something called archaea, which is a new prokaryotic organism. I never learned about this when I was in college. I'm that old. But now there's talk about this group of organisms that are also playing a role there. Not much is really understood about them at this time. A healthy microbiome is really all about balance. So the body is constantly trying to decide, who am I going to tolerate and ignore and allow to live there, and who is causing a threat to my health, who is a pathogen, who should I attack? And there's always some of each going on, so it's a balance between trying to support the good guys and crowd out the bad guys. And so this is the decisions that our immune system is making every single day. So who are they? And the next question then is, what are they doing? And actually what they are doing is turning out to be a heck of a lot more important than who they are. And when we first looked at bacteria that were living within the gut or on the skin, cultures has always been sort of the way that was done, going back for the last 10 or 20 years. Cultures were used first, but they're very limited. because we can only grow what we can grow, and the environment we grow things in is never going to be exactly the same as what's their natural environment. Many bacteria are anaerobic. They need oxygen-free conditions, and so it's very hard to grow them. Or they have really special media requirements, so their culture plates are very specialized, or we don't know what they actually need to grow, and so we may be missing them. So next, what has been done is DNA and RNA sequencing. So this is what we're primarily using now, is they're looking at the genetic material of the composite of bacteria that are living there, and they're able to basically characterize patterns and numbers of bacteria. But the next level is what we're calling now metabolomics. And metabolomics is looking at the metabolites. It's looking at what they're doing and what the functions of bacteria are. So there might be different bacteria going by different names, but they're doing maybe all the same thing. And what they're doing turns out to be very, very important. So we can talk about species richness and diversity. So how many there are, how different they are within that ecosystem, alpha and beta diversity. So differences within samples and between samples. What the role of fungi, archaea, and viruses are is still very poorly understood right now. But we do know that normal development of our bacterial populations, our microbiota, really depends on what happens to us very early in life, what microbial exposures we have in those first months. This is true for humans and animals, really depends on just the normal stuff that we need to get exposed to. In fact, if we are kept, and puppies and kittens too, are kept germ-free, they actually have very poor development of their immune system. Their mucosal lymphoid tissues just don't grow and develop like they're supposed to. So looking at normal gut microbiota, we can talk about their functions, what they're doing normally for us as an organism. They are protecting our bodies from invasion by pathogenic bacteria. So if we have lots of good guys living there, our hope is it's going to crowd out the bad guys. We're never going to get rid of the bad guys, but we want to make sure they don't have a chance to thrive. So all of the good bacteria then are competing for those essential nutrients and metabolites. And this is also stimulating our immune responses. That's a good thing. We want to have our immune system have something to do in a positive way and not a bad way. And so this is why normal bacteria are important. It also stimulates the proper development of lymphoid organs throughout the body. And I've listed several here: our Peyer's patches, our mesenteric lymph nodes. It stimulates our T cells and our B cells and production of immunoglobulins. And this ongoing signaling is always happening between the microbiota and our immune system. There is a constant communication back and forth, and that's happening for our entire lifetime. The normal skin then, if we talk about our bacterial populations on the skin, there are trillions of microbes that are growing on skin cells, in hair follicles, and our sebaceous glands. In fact, on the human skin, it's been said there's about 1 billion bacteria per square centimeter. That is a huge amount in a very small space. The location of your skin affects what bacteria are living there. So if you're hairy or you're bald, if it's on your back or in your armpit, your groin, your ear, your nose, there's different bacteria populations living there. So there's differences in that ecosystem based on location. And the highest microbial diversity actually in dogs was found on their nose. In the human, it was found in their armpit, which is interesting. So you can think of that dog's probably sticking his nose everywhere, and that's why he has more bacteria living there. There's different phylum or species of bacteria. I've listed a few of those on the slide. These are familiar names, you know, similar to what's living in the gut is also living on the skin surface. So then there's something we call the hygiene hypothesis, which means maybe we can be a little too careful and too clean. In fact, this is something that comes up in humans, that there's a theory that the increase in allergies we may be seeing over the past 50 years could be due to a lot of things, but changes in our diet, to living in an environment that's actually too clean, our urban lifestyles, and even overuse of antibiotics. So if we're taking out our healthy bacteria by using antibiotics too much. And it makes sense actually that our pets are really living in the same environment and exposed to very similar things that we are, so they could actually have similar issues. This combination of factors can result in long-term changes on our microbiome. So this is really fascinating. It's a hypothesis, so we don't know if this is actually true, but definitely something interesting to think about. So there is actually as well something we call the gut-skin connection. This means what's happening in our gut could relate to what's happening in our skin. Those two ecosystems of bacteria are actually communicating together. And there are definite human studies that confirm this. There is an intestinal surface, there is a skin surface, and they are interacting. They actually have a lot in common. Metabolites that are coming from those microbiota in the intestinal tract actually can affect the skin. So if we have disruptions in T cells, we can affect vitamin A absorption and vitamin D, and that can have direct impacts on what our skin is looking like. There's also neuroendocrine interactions that are happening all the time. And atopic dermatitis in humans has been shown to be associated with dysbiosis, meaning abnormal balance of bacteria, both in the skin and the intestinal tract. So this means if our gut has imbalance, our skin might also have imbalance, and that can result in skin conditions, inflammation, and infections, or relate to what's going on with atopic dermatitis. And there are actually veterinary studies showing us the same thing. If we have intestinal dysbiosis, that could also increase risk of developing atopic dermatitis. Changes in the gut microbiome might also influence how much inflammation we have in allergic responses. So if our gut is not healthy, we are more inflamed, and perhaps our skin becomes more inflamed. Probiotics have some studies showing that we can actually make impacts on what atopic dermatitis looks like in dogs. This one strain of Lactobacillus rhamnosus was looked at in beagle puppies, and when they were given the probiotic, they actually had lower immunoglobulin levels. They had milder reactions to intradermal skin testing, and this exposure to probiotics actually had long-term effects, meaning if we support that healthy microbiome, this was lasting even for a long period of time. They had lower IL-10 levels in these dogs. In the gut-skin connection, just a few more details, we see atopic dogs. They also have lower gut microbiota diversity than healthy dogs. So we see dysbiosis in our dogs with atopy as well, similar to humans. And the gut microbiota might influence allergen tolerance. So there are some cells in the gut called T cells, T regulatory cells or TREG cells that are present, and there are direct interactions with the microbiota and their production of short chain fatty acids. These are going to modify host proteins, they're going to modulate gene expression. All this means that that microbiota is super important with what is happening between the gut and the skin. So what makes a healthy microbiome? And I'll share with you that there's really not a very black and white definition of healthy microbiome. In humans, we know there's a lot of variance between individuals, and there's really not a consensus of what makes the core microbiome. Lifestyle, environmental factors are really influential, and we know that happens very early in life. So it's really important when our dogs and cats and humans are young, that we have a really good microbiome development. Metabolic functions, or those metabolomics I mentioned, are very highly conserved. So ultimately, this is where the research may go to define metabolomics, might help us better define normal versus abnormal gut balance. And strains matter, different types of bacteria within strains, and diversity is super important. So having a lot of bugs in the gut is better than having just a few. And even within the gut itself, there's going to be differences between the large intestine, the small intestine, and maybe even different locations within the small intestine or the large intestine. There are different niche specific microbiotas happening all along the gastrointestinal tract. So this is a vast ecosystem again, and it's really fascinating, but so much to learn here. This was a paper I encourage you to read. So if you're really interested in the microbiome, this was a human paper that talks about all the different impacts that can affect what we define as healthy. And just as we mentioned, there's personal factors, genetics, how we were born, our age, our gender, who we live with, other people in our environment, certainly our lifestyle, our diet, what medications we take can impact our microbiome. And then over our lifetime, different disease conditions will impact the microbiome. And all these things are going to affect the balance of that microbiota, who's there, who's living there, and how they're interacting with each other. So it's also been said that nutrition is very powerful and has the chance to rewrite microbiome medicine. So this circles back again to what we can do with nutrition and supplements that impact the microbiome and support that balance. The microbiota is always transducing nutrient signals from the diet to the host. And diet is probably the safest way and the one with the least side effects, and perhaps the most effective strategy at modifying the microbiome. But we have lots of questions and lots to learn about this. But all of our efforts into getting the best diet, nutrition, and supplements in that supports that microbiome is hopefully going to have some impacts on skin health as well as many other body systems. So how can we support the skin? Looking at the gut microbiome. And again, going back to optimal nutrition, we got to have a very good diet, proteins, fats, fibers, vitamins, and minerals. These are all coming in our complete and balanced diet. But then I'm also thinking about supplements. What supplements can I bring in that's going to support skin health? I'm looking at holistic supplements. We're fortunate enough to have a company like Standard Process that provides some of these broad spectrum supplements we can consider. We want to look at supplements that provide gut support, and this is where we'll talk about prebiotics or fibers, probiotics, different strains going in there. Postbiotics is a term that you will start to hear as well. That's talking about those metabolites. So fibers that feed the gut, the bacterial bugs that live there, and then also what they make, those postbiotic metabolites, how can we use those potentially in supplements to support that pet? And then supplements that are going to balance inflammatory responses. So this could be our omega-3s. This could be our hemp oil products. This could be things that we're using to reduce inflammation in our inflamed pets and hopefully reduce the need for those medications that also might impact the gut microbiome. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information for everybody. We kind of flew through that, but I hope that we can have good discussion and questions. I'm happy to take any questions for you now, if anybody has any.
All right, we have great information, by the way. We have a few questions that have come in. We still have some time, guys, that if there are questions that you're thinking of as we're talking through some of these answers, don't hesitate to type them into the Q&A. Please be sure to put them into the Q&A just because the chat is kind of going crazy with names right now, making sure that everybody has their names entered so they can get their CE. So if you do have questions, please just put them into the Q&A. And Dr. Gaylord, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
ahead,
Jay, if I can interrupt you. I just have two attendees that their phone numbers are showing up and not their name. So, and that's what I've been trying to get, because I won't be able to get you a certificate, or if you're chosen for one of the swag bags, one of the numbers, area code 501 and area code 760. If those two people can send me their names in the chat, I can update the system for them, but otherwise they won't be able to get their certificate or if they get a swag bag. That's all. Thanks.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right. So there's a few questions that are related to diet and what you would recommend for diets for certain conditions. And I realize that these might be loaded questions, but I'll at least give them to you. So what type of food would you recommend for a cat that has chronic ear infections?
Chronic ear infections. Well, okay, so that's going to be a case where you're going to have to, go through your process of doing your examination and taking samples and taking a look at what's going on in those ears. So if it's chronic, for sure, doing your cytologies, we're probably doing cultures because sometimes we'll get antibiotic resistant bacteria that are living there. And then ultimately looking really down to the underlying cause of what's driving that. So for cats, we are considering food allergy as a potential cause. Cats can have food allergies. They can also have environmental allergies. I think allergies are probably a really major driver of ear infections that are recurrent. So it's hard I can't give you a catch-all diet for that. but we might consider novel protein diets or hydrolyzed protein diets as one or the other approach, just depending on everything else that's going on with that pet. So your veterinarian is going to, go through that checkoff list and make sure that makes sense. I also think that ears are hard because if they're chronic, they often get chronic changes in that ear canal. And that's going to make them just more susceptible for relapses or recurrences. And I'm sure you've seen the cases that are really bad. You might even end up with surgeries that are necessary to kind of open up that ear canal or actually remove part of that ear canal. More so that happens to dogs, but I have seen it happen to cats as well. Okay.
Thank you. There also is a question about what food would you recommend for discoid lupus in a husky?
Ooh, yeah. Okay. Well, the age is going to be important there. So if it's a young dog and it's having symptoms, well, I mean, you're assuming, if I'm assuming it's automatically diagnosed properly with discoid lupus, I would feel like, there's not a specific diet indication for that type of dog, but I would still be thinking about sufficient zinc levels, covering that, just knowing it's a husky. I would want to make sure that that's, there, in the diet at a sufficient amount. And if I was uncertain about that, I'm not afraid to actually supplement just in case anyway, just because of that breed. Beyond that, I feel like, we might consider diets that have omega-3 fatty acids included in the diet. But I can do any diet with omega-3 fatty acids also supplemented on top of the diet. So sometimes that comes in the diet, and certain, prescription diets have high amounts like our JMs or others. But if the owner is happy with the current diet, I might be reaching for an omega-3 supplement on top of the diet instead.
Thank you. Can coprophagia in dogs cause skin issues? Is there a good way to discourage it?
I don't think coprophagia causes skin issues. I mean, I think you could probably make a long connection with like a young dog that gets parasite like hookworms, and then they end up getting skin issues, the skin form of hookworm infection. But I think, there's behavioral causes for eating feces. There's also, people will speculate that there could be nutrient deficiencies. I really don't think that's usually the case. I think it's probably behavioral and learned behavior most of the time. Sometimes it's territorial. If there's a disease condition going on, though, that dog is super hungry, like Cushing's, then that might be driving more likely what we call pica, or they're just eating everything in the environment, and that includes eating feces. But it's also important to remember that it's not necessarily an abnormal behavior. I mean, it's in the spectrum of potentially normal dog behavior, and it just really is gross to us. So we want to discourage it. And, so it's a complicated answer, I think, because it depends on the frequency of it, how obsessed they are, and everything else going on with that dog. So we would work down a checklist and see if there's a medical problem first. And if there isn't one we can really identify, then it probably is behavioral. And of course, you're probably familiar with all kinds of strategies to try to stop it. I think they're variable in how effective they are. I think a lot of times you have to, if you want to discourage it, you just have to pick it up, and you have to be there, and you have to give them negative reinforcement, or, stop them from doing it.
Okay. How would you work up a pet who was spayed or neutered at 8 weeks old?
How would I work up a pet? Meaning, well, if there's nothing wrong with them, I wouldn't work them up, right? If they have a clinical problem, I don't know if the age of spay and neuter may or may not affect certain things. Like I think anytime we spay and neuter pets, we are changing their metabolism, maybe making them a little more likely to become overweight. But that can happen at any point in time, not just 8 or 9 weeks. There's speculation about development, of our body parts when they're spayed and neutered that young. So I suppose if I had a patient that had been spayed or neutered very young, I'd be watching out for some of those issues, how they develop orthopedically, or maybe, with female dogs, we look at external genitalia. Do they have a hooded vulva potentially from a very young spay neuter? May or may not happen, but I think that's what I would be thinking with them.
What about pets that are allergic to everything? How do you choose a good supplement?
Well, so, I would be trying to break that down a little more. I think when you say allergy, that means that there truly is an immune reaction, the development of antibodies to every molecule that's coming in there. And it has to be a protein molecule to elicit an immune response. And it's really rare for them to be allergic to everything. Like it truly is. And I think more likely you have an inflamed pet. And that means there could be allergies going on, but there's a lot of inflammation also. And so, if it's the skin we're talking about, it's really important for them to get checked for secondary infections, bacterial or yeast, because sometimes that is an issue that's driving that, continuing that inflammation. And we need to treat that. We need to figure out how we're going to eliminate those and treat them as long as they need to be treated. And that could mean oral antibiotics, but it could be topicals. A lot of topical therapies are the better strategy, and dermatologists are pushing us to trying to use more topical therapies, some of those botanical extracts and thinking about that. And then for me, if I'm the nutritionist, I'm making sure that I have a really healthy diet, all the proteins and fats they need for skin health, vitamins and minerals. But then supplements, we're looking for supplements that are going to balance inflammation or reduce inflammation. And so omega-3s comes up quite often. I might be thinking about CBD products depending on where you live. There's all varying feelings about how we can talk about that as veterinarians still. But then there's other products that support the immune system and hopefully support a normal immune response. And Standard Process has some of those. So.
I'm sorry, I just lost the question I was going to ask. For an animal that has protein losing enteropathy or PLE, poor hair and skin, would you be concerned about supplements not being absorbed very well?
100%.
Because of that?
Yes. Yep. So if we have a protein losing enteropathy, we have a really sick gut. And, one really big problem with those pets is they probably could have fat malabsorption. And anytime you have malabsorption of fats, you're going to have essential fatty acid deficiencies. And you might also have fat soluble vitamin deficiencies. So our vitamin A, our vitamin D, our vitamin E, and even K, those are our fat soluble vitamins, may not be absorbed very well. Some of my patients, I will end up giving them injectable fat soluble vitamins to try to get over that. A lot of those patients will end up on ultra low fat diets, but there is a balance between ultra low fat and too low in fat. But it's very tricky, and diet helps treat those patients, but a lot of them need medications. They need immune suppressing medications. I always tell my clients, we've got to put out the fire. You can think of the gut is on fire, and if we've got to put it out, because it doesn't matter what I put in their mouth, it's just going to burn up. So yes, it's a balance between medication and diet in those cases. And in supplements, we are limiting in those cases. If they have very severe GI disease, we're not putting in a lot of things in there because we have a very limited ingredient diet in that case.
All right, so we're at the top of the hour. There's still a few questions here. And so for those of you that weren't able to get your question answered, we can certainly reach out to you after the fact, or I would encourage you can either reach out to Dr. Gaylord at the email that she has on the screen. If it's a question that's more directly related to perhaps the standard process supplements, you can reach out to me at VetHelp, that's VETHELP at standardprocess.com. But there's one more question here that I think really ties into a lot of what you talked about today, Dr. Gaylord. So maybe let's do this one quick and then we'll wrap it up for the evening. So when talking about supplements in general and omega-3/6s, when they start these, is it something that can be given for life, or is it short term? Is it more case dependent? The question is really just kind of like, how long should you be giving omegas
Okay.
to the animals?
Okay, well, so no, for the 6s, their diet will contain omega-6. So it's the only situation I'm supplementing omega-6 might be young dogs on poor diets with really scruffy looking hair coats that flaky skin where I'm thinking they got a rough start in life. And for those dogs, I might be doing omega-6 and omega-3s, some of those combined supplements. And it might be just until, you know, they are fully grown. And if they're doing really well, then I may not be continuing that past that point. I feel differently about omega-3 fatty acids. I truly feel like that supplement, I'm a big fan of omega-3s. I take them myself. I think we need more omega-3s in our diets in general, and this is also true for dogs and cats. And I think you're going to see pet foods are going to have more and more of them over time because there's just so many health benefits from omega-3s. We have a dose recommendation for skin disease, for cardiac health, for gut, you know, certain types of inflammatory bowel disease even might respond to omega-3s. Pancreatitis, even though it's a fat, has been used for chronic pancreatitis cases, kidney disease, cognitive health. The list is quite long of possible health benefits for omega-3s. So usually when I'm starting them on an omega product, I'm keeping them on that indefinitely as long as they tolerate it well.
Awesome. All right, so we are out of time for tonight. Lori, is there anything that you need to say to wrap this up?
Yeah, I just would like to thank everybody for attending tonight. Thank you, Dr. Gaylord, and thank you, Jody, for sharing your wealth of information with all of us. Again, we will be sending an email tomorrow to the 50 people that we are picking for the swags. So look out for an email from me tomorrow to get your address. And I hope everyone has a great evening. And if you do have any questions, you can also email them to me and I can make sure Jody or Dr. Gaylord get them.
I want to add one quick thing. If
Sure.
any of you out there are very interested in nutrition, I want to tell you that the American College of Veterinary Nutrition is now part of the Internal Medicine College subspecialty. And one of our missions is to really promote the nutrition specialty within the veterinary technician world. And we really believe that you all are the front lines in nutrition in the veterinary hospital. You are the ones taking the diet histories. You do a lot of time talking to clients about nutrition and supplements. And we want to empower you and give you that role and expand that role because you can really help your doctors if you handle a lot of nutrition conversation. And you can be the front lines on weight management programs. There's lots of things you can do with nutrition. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to check into the specialty of veterinary technicians in nutrition. There are some programs out there that can support you in that.
Yes, thank you so much. And if anybody, again, has any questions that you would like to get to the doctor, you can email me and I will get them to her.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate everybody's attention.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.